Hello, and welcome to the stream. This was not a particularly planned thing. This is just a hobby night, but I needed a reason to get back on the hobby bandwagon. It's been a few weeks since I've done any painting, and I have so much Conquest to paint, and so this evening is a little bit of an excuse to get back into that and paint some Conquest. For those who are used to my normal videos, this will be considerably slower paced. I can't talk nearly as fast as I do in videos while I'm painting, but hopefully it makes for some interesting listening. And if we have some people along to have a chat, I will just talk about whatever people are talking about. Otherwise, I'll talk about hobby. So, welcome to the stream. This may or may not be a regular thing. Might try and do this once a week moving forward if it's a good time and if it gets me painting stuff. But for now, let's crack on. So, what we have here is a 100 Kingdoms chapter mage from Conquest. The miniature, which you can see in frame there, has a friend of mine described it a little bit as, if you've heard the phrase, she breasted boobily down the stairs. And we're going to do something about that, I think, when we get to that. But I've blocked in a few basic colors, and that's just the first step, really. I'm getting base coats down. And this is really what I would call the discovery phase, and there'll be some people who know that phrase in a professional context who wince when I say that. But something someone spoke to me about a little while back, I've got a friend, well, a friend of my partner's actually, is getting used to getting into miniatures painting as a hobby. He's a 3D printer, and so very naturally segues from that hobby into painting. And he's been painting up some owlbears and stuff like that. And one of the things that he said was, it doesn't look how I wanted it to look, or it doesn't look how I expected it to look. And that actually kind of amused me in a gentle way, because I remember feeling that way. When I first started painting, I had always had like a vision in my head of how something was going to look. I'm just getting a little note from the stream here. Please use a keyframe frequency of 4 seconds or less. I don't know what that means. Stream settings. So if someone is watching this and can tell me how the stream quality is, because this is just a test. Currently, keyframes are not being sent often enough, which can cause buffering. I don't particularly mind if there is buffering. That's totally okay. But anyway, we'll just crack on. So, and we'll do this for a bit and then see how it goes. So if anyone does watch this, and just let me know. What he said was, it doesn't look how I wanted it to look when I first sort of started. And I remember that feeling because I used to feel the same way. I had grand visions in my mind of what a miniature would look like. Then I would start painting it. And then, because I don't have perfect ability to read what color will look like on a miniature until it's on the miniature, most of us don't. We don't have that like perfect predictability. The miniature, any given miniature that I was painting, this is back in the War Machine and the Games Workshop days, wouldn't look exactly how I thought it would look. And I would be disappointed in that even if the miniature looked good. But one of the things that you learn very slowly over time is that painting a miniature, I mean, once you have a technique down, you can get a pretty good idea. Like if you're replicating something that you've done previously, or if you're replicating something that someone else has done, like most of my Yuching, for example, is painted in Angel Giraldez's style. Well, you can get a pretty good idea of what it will look like. But if you're doing something yourself from scratch, then generally speaking, the first step is going to be discovery. Just putting paint on the miniature and seeing, and you'll have techniques, right, that will make sense. You'll have like, I'm going to want to use washes, I'm going to want to use these colors. There'll be sort of like knowledge that you have that you bring. But It's really difficult to tell what a miniature is going to look like ahead of time, particularly if it's a one-off, right? I hope to have 2 chapter mages in my 100 Kingdoms army eventually, but the second one's a conversion. And so when I paint it, it's going to be from scratch. When I paint this one, it's going to be from scratch. And that's fine, but it means that what I'm doing right now is literally putting paint on the miniature and kind of just seeing what it looks like. I'm letting the miniature uncover itself, and I'll have some ideas. Like, I know that I wanted, because I am an Empire player at heart, white and red, striped, whatever you would call the puffy sleeves. And, you know, gotta have white pages, and we'll do some freehand eventually. We'll see how far we get this evening. Some freehand text or diagrams, maybe mathematical diagrams or astrological astronomy on the book. But that will be probably a couple of sessions away. We'll see. But for now, because white is a bastard to paint, it's really just a question of getting the base coats down, and then we'll do a kind of slapdash highlight. And I mentioned techniques. One of the things about miniatures painting is what you'll build over time is a collection of techniques, things that you know work. And Song of Ice and Fire actually taught me the value of easing up off of the highly technical stuff. Because if you are doing an army, like an entire army, God help you if you try and get really technical with that. I thought about doing, she's got a ruffled collar. I think that's going to be black. I thought about doing it white, but the risk that she looks like a clown is way, way too high. Hello, Zephyr. Welcome to the stream. So that's enough white, I think, on the miniature. I also considered doing her cape white as well, but I'm not hand painting that, so we'll probably do it black. I wanted a fair bit of black on this miniature because most of the 100 Kingdoms aren't, and I might bring some of those out to show and tell a bit later. But they use a lot of black, but it's metallic black, and she doesn't have much metal on her, so if I want to mirror that scheme, I knew I would want some black cloth. Now, I don't have a black cloth recipe for the 100 Kingdoms, so we are going to have to just play this one by ear. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Now, the color mix for white, by the way, and this is a very warm white, is 50-50. What are we looking for? No, there's a yellow that I use. That's the cream. So this is model color ice yellow, and then that gets mixed 50-50 with, I don't have it here, but it's a warm grey. There we go. And that collectively produces a very warm, you can see it probably there. The light is a little cool, but it's a very warm grey undertone. And that can then be highlighted and like slapdash highlighted with cream white. And that produces a really warm white that I kind of like for cloth. However, it's also a good base for weathering. One of the few weathering techniques I use in this 100 Kingdoms scheme is pigment. Now, I'd originally planned, when I set out to do this game, the goal was that I was going to finally learn how to use oil paints. Oil washes and oil weathering is something that has eluded me for a very long time. I think I've had 2 cracks at it before now, and it was disastrous both times. Like, it just did not go how I wanted it to go. Like, this time around, this time we're going to figure out how to do oil washes. And so I did up a test miniature. I had a crack, and it went terribly again. And I'm not actually willing to consign the technique to unachievable by me. I actually think I know, particularly this last time around, I think I figured out a lot of the things I was doing wrong. And in particular, probably the biggest issue was using like literally hardware quality stuff like thinners and cleaners. And you're working with oils, like you need to respect how much that medium demands thinning. Like, it's not an acrylic, you don't just wet it down. But It didn't work. So like third time was not the charm. However, in my frustration, I had one of those men will literally do anything to avoid X moments. And purely as an excuse to not have to use oils despite the fact that I'd said to myself I would, I sat down and worked out how to do weathering, pigment weathering, to a standard that I was happy with. And I actually am pretty happy with it. If you've ever seen any of my 100 Kingdom stuff, and I might go and get some in a moment. The weathering pigment I just applied to the white, but it just carries. It carries the white really hard. And the secret to it actually was, I mean, it's just pigment, right? It's not special. It just needs to be applied correctly. And this brush. This is an Army Painter. It's actually a dry brush. It's the smallest Army Painter dry brush. But these are just, they're just makeup brushes. And it turns out that a brush designed for applying, among other things, dry pigment is good at applying dry pigment. Fancy that. So I was able to figure out how to do a weathering technique, and it's like a dark brown black pigment. It is this stuff, MIG Fantasy Pigments. This is Rocket Exhaust. In frame there, Rob. And it looks black, but it's actually a really dark black brown. And that just melds really nicely to like dirty up the paper. So once I've got this highlighted, I actually don't need to do anything else to this paper or to her white cloth, because at the very end, like the very last step, pre-varnishing, is to come in and weather the entire thing. And that just pulls all the white together, actually gets really nice smooth transitions. And it's a technique that I would not have learned if I had not gotten absolutely jack of trying to make oils work and literally taught myself to do something else as an alternative. So you build techniques and tools. You just, over time, you just build up a stable of, you learn how to do a wash, you learn how to dry brush. I actually did not know how to dry brush properly, like not really properly, until I got around to my old Dominion in Conquest. Didn't use it for the free folk, never used it for anything Infinity. You don't really need to in Infinity because you're not painting enough stuff. The mass of the armies isn't there. But dry brush, like proper dry brushes, those makeup brushes are literally the secret as far as I'm concerned to proper dry brushing. Alright, now you can probably already see that's reading, now it's reading a slightly cooler white than it is in person. The light mixture that I'm using for the camera is just a little cooler than it would actually be in person. But that's already reading as white, like as proper white. And there's a little bit of show and tell, actually. Let's grab a couple of miniatures from the 100 Kingdoms. There is no way for me to conceivably fit an Archangel on stream with the camera set up, but you can see this lad here. All of that brown and blackening around the bottom of the cape. It's under a lot of exposure because I'm painting. That just comes from weathering after the fact. I wonder if it'll show up a little better. Yeah, no, the extreme light that I need for overhead painting is only going to go so far. But then, same deal kind of on these guys. Just the white. You can see how it's been brought down a little bit there. Let's just leave them there for now. Hey, Sinan and Hopi, welcome. Oil washes worked fine in my experience if you use a good thinner and thin the oil until it looks like colored thinner. Yep. So one of the things that I found that I was not doing correctly was I was not using a good thinner. I was literally using, I did not realize the difference between thinner and odorless terps for cleaning. And so I was trying to thin my oil washes with odorless terps. And if you have any experience with using oil as a medium, you will probably know that was not a good call. But I have learned a different technique instead. And there will be an army. There will be an army at some point that I will come back to. That will be the army for oil paints. You do, to my knowledge, still have to clean your brushes. Like if you're dealing with acrylics and oils, sorry, if you're dealing with oils, you have to clean your brushes with thinner, so not just with thinner, but with brush cleaner, with terps, etc. And there's no such thing as odorless terps, unfortunately. There is only, at best, low odor terps, and even low odor terps is not best to use inside. But I'll get there. One day I'll figure it out. And it will be another technique that we add to the pool. Now what we're doing now, my recipe for red on these makes a lot of use of washes, but it doesn't just want to go over like flat brown. You need something to work with. And so this is a fantastic color. This is Flames of War Cavalry Brown. And I'm actually pretty sure I have that color because Angel Garaldez's recipe for Yuching Orange uses it, or at least something very much like it. And as a base for oranges, it's really nice. You build up pretty much from Cavalry Brown to like these kind of colors, orange, red, and then light orange. I'm pretty sure is the Corvus Belli Studio Yuching mix. And with good reason, it's a really lovely color mix. But I've used Cavalry Brown for a lot of things in this scheme, the 100 Kingdoms, because it makes a nice basis for a brown red, for lack of a better term. And since I use it in a bunch of other colors, a bunch of other like color mixes, like a lot of these leather-based tones that she was never meant to be, like I wanted to brush paint her basically entirely, but I had the airbrush out doing the bases, and so I just slapped a little bit of this. It's just 50-50 Cavalry brown and black, and it makes a nice leather base coat. Really just did that as a sort of sketching process. But if I want like her sash to be red, for example, it needs something to work with. You can't apply washes. Acrylic or oil. Maybe oil, actually, I don't know it well enough. But you can't apply acrylic washes or army painter washes over a color as like dark brown as that leather base is and expect to get anything other than slightly discolored dark brown. So Cavalry Brown's good enough, and it'll give it a pretty like earthy, rich brown kind of color. And I want her sash to be red, and then the slashes on her puffed sleeves, and that'll probably be all of the red. I could do the book cover red. I think I want it to be a darker, simpler color though. Like I might end up just literally just putting a black wash over that or something. And then maybe gold binding. It looks like there's some metal on it. But what we're basically just doing here, as I mentioned before, is just finding the colors. And if there's a bit, I'll put a color on something and be like, oh yeah, no, that looks good. That looks like that should go there. We'll just carry on. And if it looks bad, well, everything is correctable. Everything is fixable. Even when you're working with airbrushes, one of the, very early on when I was figuring out how to do airbrushing, which is a really good tool, by the way, like strong recommend if you have the space is the main thing. When I was learning how to use the airbrush, I got into this thing in my head where I would never with a brush be able to duplicate the effect you could get with an airbrush. And you get out of that. Like you learn like 1, you absolutely can. 2, human eyes don't work that way. 3, you can go back with an airbrush if you absolutely have to. Like nothing is irrecoverable. But I have since learned that if you really need to, with a bit of time and glazing and a bit of care, and the human eye will correct most of anything that looks weird for you. But in this case, we're just laying down base coats. Zephyr asks, hey Rob, did you see the Melbourne Conquest player making a skirmish game using the Conquest card system? I did not. I mean, there is technically already a skirmish game using the Conquest card system. It's called First Blood. But what's the deal? What are they suggesting? a lot of people have aspersions of game design. It's a fun thing to think about, but it is way harder than you would think. I've got a mate actually who is considering doing, actually probably in a similar vein, has this idea of, hey Ed, good to see you, has this idea of Infinity is a game that he really likes because it has InfoWar, and like no other miniatures war game has InfoWar, which is super cool. He's got this idea of, it's almost Batman-esque, I think, but Netrunner-esque as well. Like let's have asymmetric warfare, corporation, hacker, that kind of thing. But going from high concept to this actually works, this is a game, is hugely challenging. Yeah, playtesting. Yeah, no, go and have a look and see what they're doing. Early versions of games, particularly if it's like someone's first game, are invariably rough as guts. And I say that with affection, right? Like, game design is hard. Game design is not actually easy. I sit here in my ivory tower. We all sit here in our ivory towers being like, oh, how could X and Y company have stuffed this up? This balance is terrible. This mechanic is terrible. And then you sit down and try and write a rule that is capable of resisting, for lack of a better term, a malevolent rules genie. And it's like, oh, this is really hard, actually. But no, let me know how that. If you jump in and give them a hand with playtesting, let me know how that goes. Because the Conquest card system is an interesting one, where I would actually argue it's not a, how do I put this? Because it's an extremely useful system, but specifically it's an extremely useful system in accomplishing some things that Conquest in particular needs to accomplish. It's not a system that I would just staple into a game because I thought it was good by itself. And this is without knowing at all what these Melbourne lads have in mind and what their plan is. But the thing that the card system does in Conquest is, like, it's really, it's a high friction mechanic from the player perspective. And that is its utility as a system. Because, and actually this is going to be a canned rant time. Zephyr says, yeah, my own old game design attempts from 2 months ago. Yeah, it's a really fun thing to do, but bridging that gap between player and designer, it's a whole different skill set. Design, you start having to do things like think about how language works and how to actually communicate your idea and how to actually build a system that's fun. You're looking at things like what emerges from this system. Hell. This is me not paying attention and I've got fucking black all over this. Alright, we'll come back and fix that up later. Because everything is fixable. No idea how I did that. Got black all over her pantaloon sleeve. CNN Atimus says Infinity is very unique. It is. So we're talking about Conquest here as a mechanic. Actually, this is an interesting one to talk about. So for those Infinity players in the room who have not played any Conquest, Conquest is it's a rank and flank, and it's a rank and flank done in kind of like it's a love letter to. If you think about, like, for example, there's a game called Dungeon World, which is a love letter to how the authors remembered Dungeons and Dragons. It's not D&D, but it does that very, very tricky thing of trying to recreate the feeling of Dungeons and Dragons without having all of the problems with Dungeons and Dragons, which is that Dungeons and Dragons is the worst game system except that everyone knows how to play it. And so Conquest is kind of like that. Conquest tries to be that, but for Warhammer Fantasy, like the Warhammer Fantasy editions pre-end times kind of thing. And one of the things that it grapples with, and one of the things that it does is it's a game that has pre-measuring, and it's a game that has regimental movement with wheeling, etc. And this kind of segues us into a game design topic that is something that I have thought about a little bit because Conquest is an interesting case study, which is how critically important Ivory has a canned Dungeons and Dragons rant. I think anyone who has played Dungeons and Dragons for any length of time and has then played another system has a canned Dungeons and Dragons rant. Dungeons and Dragons is the lingua franca of role-playing games. It's not actually a good role-playing game. In fact, there are so many very valid criticisms of Dungeons and Dragons in terms of a design perspective. But a bit like 40k, it's approachable, and everyone knows how to play it, which means that you can sit down and play Dungeons and Dragons. And that's why we have so many game systems that are, or like not so many game systems, so many homebrews of, hey guys, this is my attempt to use Dungeons and Dragons to play a mid-50s diesel punk investigation combat light game. And it's like, it's combat light. Dungeons and Dragons is the worst possible system, but all of your friends know how to play Dungeons and Dragons, and so it's your starting point. And then you go and play something that's purpose-built. Like, there is a joy in playing systems that are purpose-built, if they're a good system. Using D&D to play Star Wars. Yeah, so my example of taking psychic damage from a role-playing game, because it was Dungeons and Dragons trying to be X, is actually Starfinder. So Starfinder is Paizo's Pathfinder, but offering. And it's, as you might guess, Starfinder, it's Pathfinder in space. And particularly it's first edition Pathfinder, so D&D 3.5 effectively. And the great challenge that Starfinder has is that the way that the damage economy works in Dungeons and Dragons very much relies on just doing a little bit of damage to the players at a time. And it means that in Starfinder, you have like Meson Fusion Blaster, powered by the heart of a dying star, obliterates all matter that it touches, capable of igniting supernovas, deals 1d8 plus 1 damage. And I just could not get my head around how that, like, it was completely unimmersive. And that's not the fault of the designers. Like, they were working with the tools that they were given. It's called Starfinder. But because it was an adaptation of a system originally designed for slowly poking at each other with swords, it was miserable. But then you go and play a game. So the best example actually that I've played and run multiple campaigns of is a game called Blades in the Dark, which is a system designed to do one thing. And if you use it to do that one thing, it produced probably 2 of the 4 best campaigns I've ever run, hands down. Just absolutely fantastic, because you never had to fight the system to do anything. The system wanted you to do a certain thing. It encouraged players in that direction. The resolution mechanics were all super cool. There's some criticisms you can levy at Blades in the Dark. Specifically, the way that skill progression works once players reach the apex of power is kind of an issue. It begins to break the economy a little bit if you've got a player who has 4 pips in a skill, basically, and then uses that skill for everything. I have 4 pips in Brawling. I punch everything. But even then, the system still mostly works. But it's just a joy. It's just a joy to play a proper Blades game. The other critique that you might levy at Blades in the Dark is that the players can kind of realize, it's very possible for players in Blades in the Dark to realize that they are kind of invincible, except that the game still works, even if that's a thing, because the stress mechanics and the flaming out of a mission because you've pushed your stress too hard. Some of the best individual sessions I've run of Blades had 1 or more players embracing, leaning into the chaos, realizing that they were kind of invincible, and then just these incredible flame out, because you can't die in Blades in the Dark. If your character would accumulate, because you'll always spend stress before you take any lethal wounds, and if your character maximizes their stress, they don't die, they flame out of the session in some glorious blaze, and the DM gets to narrate that, and then they're out for the rest of the session, but it'll usually happen pretty late. And then they get a scar, a long-term trauma. but you get to narrate like glorious scenes that in Dungeons and Dragons would be reserved entirely for a death scene. Blades in the Dark generates those regularly, particularly if the players are pushing it, without actually having to say, well, Dave, that was super cool, but your character's dead now. So I guess you're rolling up Sir Reginald III. Such a good setting. Like, such a good setting and system. But if you try and do that with Dungeons and Dragons, the tools don't work. But if you play Dungeons and Dragons as Dungeons and Dragons, if you use it as what it's meant to be, it's fun. It's fine. It's a good time with friends. Role-playing games always are. Anyway, sorry, the question, the cards, this is going to be like this, by the way. This is going to be me following half of a thought at a time, desperately, occasionally looking up at chat, because I've got about half my brain on this, because the other half is trying not to get black on the red sash that I'm in the middle of painting. It'll buff out. Is friction in wargames, and the purpose of things like the card system in Conquest. So Conquest uses, for those Infinity players who aren't familiar, Conquest has a system where it's a rank and flank, and you'll have a certain number of units available to you on any given turn, based on what's arrived, what you're fighting the battle with at that point, and that number will increase over time and then decreases as you lose regiments. But because players, it's one of those games where players have got pretty perfect information. Players can pre-measure, players always know, there's no hidden information mechanic. Players always know what their opponent has access to, what they have access to. Pre-measurement exists. You have a problem where the game can very easily become deterministic. And this is something that I've thought about doing a video, actually, but then kind of decided against, because it's too esoteric a topic of conversation. But for a live stream, it's fine. And determinism in games is one of those things that is just absolutely toxic to fun. And yet, if you give players everything they want, they will often push towards deterministic mechanisms. And there's psychology underpinning that sort of boils down to people thinking that them winning is the optimal and correct outcome in any given game. And so you see this in, like, anyone who's played Hearthstone. Hearthstone has, or at least when I last played it, it has a level of randomness in it from time to time that can only be described as zany. Like Hearthstone is wacky. Hearthstone has, units that die and spawn completely random units. Have a good day, Sinan. Units that will die and spawn completely random units, and sometimes it will spawn random units that can spawn other random units, etc. There are random effects. Hearthstone's mana curve was built from the ground up as Magic the Gathering is too random. We're going to have a nice fixed mana curve. But from there, Hearthstone veered heavily into wacky randomness. And it's actually really important to note that is not a bad thing. Because determinism in games, situations where both players can look at the game state and go, yeah, this is solved. This is where this is at. This is not going anywhere from here. That's toxic to a game. Because at that point, you're not playing anymore, right? At that point, there is no more play. There is just going through the motions until the motions are complete. But on top of that, there's a major problem if a game can produce a deterministic state. The other major problem is that the better player always wins. And that is actually a huge problem in a game. Because humans need, psychologically, if they are learning something, they need to have the possibility of victory. Like most people who are learning a game will need the possibility of victory. If a game results in the better player always winning, then it significantly disincentivizes play in the first instance, and it disincentivizes new players, particularly where there's a significant skill gap. There needs to be a chance. It can be a remote chance, but it's really important that the promise that you make to a new player is that, there's a circumstance. Like if they play well, and maybe they get a little bit lucky, and maybe a mistake gets made, etc., against a better player, they can win. Because otherwise they'll stop playing, like a lot of the time. You'll run into communities occasionally and players who have a like tough love. Oh, bump the camera. You'll run into players and communities occasionally who have a tough love kind of approach. But particularly while people are starting out and learning the game, they need to be able to actually play. They need to be able to explore. They need to be able to occasionally win a game so that they can see how it's done. Winning a game, among other things, is positive reinforcement. But mostly it's just that a deterministic game is no longer playing. You're not playing, you're just going through an experience, and it isn't fun anymore. And so it's really important when you're designing a game, or you're looking at mechanics in a game, that you bear that in mind. You remember that it's actually important that there exist mechanics that make it so that both players don't have possession of perfect information. Both players don't always know what the best play is. Both players don't. Both players have to actually think about and accept that there might be some randomness or variance, or there's actually a few different mechanics that a game designer can use to make a system non-deterministic. And this is not a complete fully thought. I'm kind of riffing on this, but if we want to have a game be non-deterministic, you can accomplish that by introducing mechanics that remove the ability of players to predict, and you can do that by introducing variance. You can do that by introducing fog of war or fuzziness of knowledge. And there's probably at least a couple of other ways as well. And the way that Conquest grapples with its determinism problem, because there's perfect information in other respects. Both players know what the units they have access to are. Both players know what will be on the battlefield that turn. Both players know what the distances between different regiments are. And so one of the ways that Conquest deals with what would otherwise be a risk of determinism is the card system. And so what you do in Conquest is that you'll have, I've got 5 regiments on the battlefield and a couple of characters. That'll give me 7 cards that correspond to that. And then you build a command stack, a deck that has all of those units in it. And that's the order in which you have to activate them. Now, when you draw a card, you pick a regiment that corresponds with that card. Oh, missed a bit. You activate that regiment. So if you've got 2 men-at-arms regiments in a list, for example, you can activate one of them when you draw one of your men-at-arms cards. So there's a little bit of ability to game the system by design. But when I draw my like single feudal lord character, for example, well, I have to activate him. And so you have to kind of pre-program your deck in order to play out your turn. And there's some it's very easy to do that at a base level once you understand the system. I'm going to want my big heavy cavalry unit to go either first or last, depending on the game state. If I want them to go first, it'll be because I want to get that. I want to see if I'm going first, get that charge, make that big clash, etc. Blow my opponent's, left flank out. Maybe you'll have it's early in the game and both players' lines are still developing. And so because your opponent will have to move forward over their turn, you might say, oh, well, I'm going to have my archers go last. So it's not too hard to have a basic level understanding of how that kind of stuff is meant to work. But what it does is it introduces just that little element of unknowability. Infinity does this with private information, but Infinity is a different game entirely. Because of the resolution mechanic in Infinity, like Infinity trades hugely off the fact that the resolution mechanic is a contest, and in any given fight you're assuming risk. If you take a face-to-face roll and you're using a Jotun and they have some random Fusilier with a combi, actually that might be a bad example. I think there's a point at which the Jotun becomes actually invulnerable. But a cutter, you're using a cutter against a Fusilier, and you aren't negative 12ing them. You still have some risk of something terrible happening to that cutter. And so because of that, Infinity's turn structure is colossally dynamic. Let's apply some washes. And because Infinity's turn structure is colossally dynamic, because crap is changing all the time in any given situation in Infinity, you can have a turn go off the rails hugely midway through the turn. Infinity doesn't need to fight determinism because the effect of variance and the effect of your opponent's decisions during a turn, etc., all serve to make Infinity non-predictable. But for a game like Conquest, which is a rank and flank, and it unfolds in a slower pace, and it moves in a more predictable manner, which is itself important to Conquest's design, for reasons that I could also talk about. Conquest needs to fight the risk of determinism, and so one of the ways that it does that is you never know who's going first at the beginning of a turn. So you're sitting there programming your activations. You'll be like, oh, well, I'm going to buy some time at the beginning of the turn, so I'll just have my characters activate and do nothing. And then I'll bring on the units that I have coming in from reinforcements. And only at the end of the turn will I activate my combat units that are already on the field in case they get to charge and kill something, just as an example. That's a pretty predictable turn structure, but you can never guarantee, not 100%, that your opponent isn't planning something that you didn't expect. And what that means is that Conquest has, as part of its underlying structure because of the cards, this friction built in that prevents perfect knowledge and perfect execution. In most cases, you have to make compromises while you're building that command stack. You might get unlucky, you might have something unexpected happening. You have to account for those like, well, what if I can't see the future moments? And that has a really important moderating effect on play, because if players do have perfect execution and perfect information and perfectly predictable outcomes, those are the three things that produce a deterministic game, you have a solved game state. And Song of Ice and Fire is actually terrible for this. If anyone ever wants to play a game that is a good game that nevertheless teaches us lessons about what not to do in game design, go and play Song of Ice and Fire. And even after a few games in Song of Ice and Fire, just play a game of Song of Ice and Fire. Play a couple of games, get to know the game. Play a game of Song of Ice and Fire where one player has 12 activations and one player has 7 or 8, even with the same points cost. And what you'll very quickly learn is that the activation advantage in Song of Ice and Fire is colossally abusable. And it's colossally abusable for a couple of reasons. The first is that there is no friction. There's nothing that stops a player from activating in an order of their choosing. Like you activate in Song of Ice and Fire, you choose units to activate unit by unit. It's very frictionless. You always get to sort of like know what's going on. The only hidden information in Song of Ice and Fire is what your opponent has, what cards your opponent has that they might play, which does introduce some friction. But you otherwise get very nearly perfect execution in Song of Ice and Fire. You get to know what's going on and just about always know that the decision you're making is correct because you have full info. And so it produces a situation where once one player has an activation advantage, because another thing that you know in Song of Ice and Fire is you always know who's going first next turn. You don't in Conquest. You know who has an advantage on the roll in Conquest to go first, but that means you have a 66% chance of predicting of one person getting the outcome that they want. That's not 100%. And are you willing to bank the outcome of an entire turn? Are you willing to roll the dice literally on getting the first turn when there's a 33% chance that you've screwed up and something terrible happens? And so in Song of Ice and Fire, you always know who's going first next turn. There are mechanics that can change it, but even those are public information, for lack of a better term. And what this means is that the person who has activation control in Song of Ice and Fire gets 2, 3, 4 unanswered activations at the end of a turn that they can use with complete freedom to then set up plays that can be executed at the beginning of next turn. And that's almost always how Game of Song of Ice and Fire goes, is that someone will have activation advantage, and they will use their activation, usually on turn 2 or turn 3. They will use activation advantage at the end of a turn to then set up a play at the beginning of next turn, because it's a rank and flank. There's some devastating flank charge, something activating off of a command zone, whatever. There'll be something that you can do. Usually it's a flank charge that blows your opponent out, but there can be any number of things. And so Conquest solves that by having this friction that is introduced via the command stack, where you have to program everything out, and you don't know who's going first. when you're setting all of that up, when you're deciding what's going to activate first, and when you're activating things at the end of the previous turn. So let's say I'm playing 100 Kingdoms, for example. And I like running wide lists in 100 Kingdoms. I like having lots of activations, because it is a powerful thing in Conquest still. It's just not as powerful as in Song. I like having lots of activations. And it will occasionally let me pull feats of maneuver, but it won't let me end a turn by running a unit of heavy cavalry up a flank, wheeling them around, facing my opponent's flank, and then barreling them into them like the Fist of God in the flank next turn, because I am not guaranteed to be able to make that play. The issue with, so the Wuju style says, the issue with Song of Ice and Fire is nothing happens by itself. Units that can't activate anymore will sit there getting dunked on. Yeah, there's no, okay, now everyone fights phase for elite units to profit. I think I sort of agree with that. So what you're referencing there, if I understand correctly, is that in things like Warhammer Fantasy, for example, because you have the fight phase and where everyone fights, you have elite units have an advantage and then they'll always be able to fight. I'm not actually sure that's how I would describe the issue with Song of Ice and Fire, because the delta in Song of Ice and Fire between a really, really dangerous unit and a really, really weak unit, it does exist, but with the right army, it's not necessarily hugely important. The main difference that you will generally find is that really elite units, hey Donograph, really elite units will often be much more durable. Damage output you can tend to find from anywhere in sufficient quantities in Song of Ice and Fire, because everything can just pile in. And so Conquest, for example, no, maybe there is something to that. So it's been a long time since I've played Warhammer Fantasy, and having the everyone fights phase that you have in Fantasy and 40k question mark these days, that Games Workshop style. It's been a long time since I played a game with that mechanic. I guess Infinity does have that mechanic where you have trying to dislodge an elite unit, an elite gunfighter requires specific tools, but I guess that's kind of comparable. That's an interesting point. Yes, because it's alternating activations, you do have the... so Conquest and Song of Ice and Fire are both alternating activations, and they don't ask your opponent to roll clashes, etc. In all three Warhammers, yeah, CC is fine on both players' turns, yeah. So it's not something I've actually hugely given a lot of thought about, to be honest, even though in Infinity it's definitely a system that exists in Infinity. If you're in your active turn trying to fight a cutter, that's a model with Nim 6, ballistic skill 15, huge armor, etc. You better not try and fight it with a combi rifle. I'm just looking at my color mix for how the heck I paint red. I need some light orange. Let's just see how this looks. This is just a highlight color, and I don't know how well it will work for this large amount of cloth, but oh, by the way, painting tip for anyone, write down your color mixes. You will thank yourself, particularly if you're doing an entire army. Just have a text file or something that's got what you used in any given case. Do I like that? I might need to recover that a little bit with the carmine, but it's a nice highlight color. I think it's just going to come through a little bit. Because I'm talking and painting, I'm not focusing on this as much as I might, but the point is, a miniature is being painted. Oh, Sovel. Not just because of alternate activations. Sovel is alternate activations, as is one-page rules. You still want to activate last, get the positional advantage of picking fights. Yep. So I was trying to make a point about Determinism, and we just shuffled on through. So one of the ways, so Conquest and Song of Ice and Fire both have, it's not both players fight, it's one player fights, which means that even a weak regiment can inflict damage on a heavy regiment, because the heavy regiment doesn't get to, a big powerful regiment, whatever, doesn't get to clap back until the next time it comes around to activate. So if your opponent walks forward into your charge range because they have to, because you have a big activation advantage over them, and then you charge them, etc., and then you get to fight them. In Conquest, I would generally note that heavier units, like big powerful units, are often robust enough, or they're just physically large enough. There are enough stands, enough wounds. You can kind of like work your way through that disadvantage that way, and then clap back and wipe out the small unit. But the overall way that the game deals with the issue is by having that that uncertainty, which stops you from maximizing. That's the main point. The point is not that a wide army shouldn't have an advantage, right? Because it's taking on disadvantages. There are disadvantages to playing a really wide list, which is that you can't concentrate force particularly effectively, which is its own separate topic. Like force concentration as a topic in any war game is an interesting one. It's not quite tempo, but it's up there. But yeah, the card, the stack, the command function, the going through and pre-programming your turn, and having to wear some risk that you've gotten things wrong, and having to wear some risk that you might not be able to go first next turn. Oh, this is Donograph asks, what am I painting? This is a 100 Kingdoms chapter mage, and I should get some skin on her soon because that will make it much easier to pick out. Despite the red, she is almost always going to be a water mage, because 100 Kingdoms water mages are really nice. They're one of the few sources of healing in 100 Kingdoms, and recursion is the best mechanic in any wargame. Give it to me. The fact that there is no recursion in Infinity is probably actually a significant balancing component. Although I say there's no recursion, there kind of is in N5. Who wants to talk about turrets? But yeah, so one of the ways that Conquest deals with the problem of perfect information is by forcing you to program stuff, etc. That does not inherently make the Conquest card stack a fun mechanic. I would go as far as to say it is a stressful mechanic, like having to learn how that works and make the most of it, and like learn how to play it and learn how the risks and stuff work. It's interesting and it's engaging, but it's an incredibly high friction mechanic. And the idea of creating a game going, fuck yeah, I love the Conquest card mechanic, I'm going to make a game around that, rather than recognizing it for what it is, which is a very important concession to what would otherwise undermine Conquest's design, is really interesting, actually. And this is not me throwing shade on those guys, because I don't know anything about this project, and my assumption is they've got something in mind that makes good use of that system, of that uncertainty, of that need to program. But the mechanic is fundamentally a high friction mechanic, and so you need a design that makes use of the high friction nature, the challenging execution, that level of mastery is not actually the right word, because mastering the command stack in Conquest is like, can you read the future and your opponent's mind? That's how you master the command stack in Conquest. And every now and again you will play in Conquest against someone who can do that, and it will make you feel like a child, even if you are otherwise very accomplished. Araguma says, I need to try Conquest sometimes to make it sound very fun. I've previously tried rank and flank games like Kings of War, but never really enjoyed them. I have never played Kings of War. I read the rules once, and couldn't quite convince myself that I wanted to play it. Kings of War is really fascinating as an example of game design, actually, because it looks at Warhammer Fantasy. And so Conquest, if you think about Conquest and Kings of War, they actually exist almost like diametrically opposite. They have taken the exact opposite approach to the same underlying game, raison d'etre, casus belli, whatever, which is that we loved Warhammer Fantasy. Hey Rob, long-time watcher, first-time commenter. Should I throw away my Corregidor, or do you think there are some good and hidden list options? There are absolutely some good and hidden list options. A person that I know, a friend called Rob, also Rob from Canberra, one of 3 Robs from Canberra, said after the last update that Corregidor has been slightly nerfed, and based on my knowledge of Rob, that means that Corregidor is excellent, because any game against Rob requires a mandatory 15 minutes of him complaining after the game about whatever is on his mind at the moment. But yes, I think there's a lot in Corregidor. So I had a game with Nomads last night, vanilla Nomads, and within it was within a couple of inches of being a very serviceable Corregidor list, because the Gator is excellent and Intruders are excellent. And those are probably the two first gunfighting pieces I would put in a No Man's list if I had access to them. Generic Lieutenant, Alguacil is fine. Yes, it's half an SWC, right? In vanilla, I used Moderators because they don't cost any SWC and they're cheaper. But a couple of Alguaciles, Gator, Intruder, and some Smoke. And in that combination, what you've got are just a very strong main battle tag, high armor, high BTS, high damage for dealing with problems symmetrically, and then smoke shooting, because smoke shooting in N5 is increasingly really, really good. And so we've just spent, if you had the Alguacil, 3.5 SWC. In a vanilla No Man's list, that would be 3 SWC. And we've got two fantastic gunfighting pieces. And then we add some Morans. I had one Moran, but if I'd had access to two, I would have. That's a Corregidor thing. I think Bandits with Infiltration Reroll are super cool now. McMurrow is still excellent. Given a choice, I would take Morlocks over Bandits, over Jaguars, but I am not sure I would take the two Morlocks that I have access to in vanilla over two duos of... Can you duo Bandits in Corregidor? I'd have to go and check. But yes, absolutely think that there are good lists in Corregidor. I would not be throwing them away. I would, if I was a Corregidor owner, probably be considering expanding into vanilla Nomads as well, because you don't need many models to do that, right? Buy one or two, buy Zoe and Pywell, and some Interventors. That's it, you're done, basically, at that point. And you have both Corregidor and vanilla. But throwing them away, no, absolutely not. They're an excellent faction. Anyway, Kings of War. Kings of War as an example of a rank and flank. So, first thing, rank and flanks are fun. They're very... If you're an Infinity player, happy to help, Math. If you are an Infinity player and you are looking for a novel experience, something that is different to what you currently play, there is a plug in this, and I'm afraid that if I squeeze, it is just going to... No, we're good? We're good. These are highly temperamental. These are scale color, and this was a gift, I think, from my partner, actually. They make some of the best skin colors, like naturalistic, not fantastic. And you just look at those, for example, that's just about between the two of them. That is just about my skin tone. But the way that scale color works is they don't behave like traditional modeling. They're, I don't know, they're almost like whatever the medium they use is, there's a higher ratio of medium to pigment, I think. And it means that even when they're not thinned down, they almost apply more like glazes, which makes them really temperamental. I've just thinned this one, and it's going to look nightmarish first coat, but it will at least make her face visible, which I want to be able to sort of see what's going on with the model. But the color is really good. If you're using Games Workshop paints for skin, they will be much more consistent. They will be much more forgiving. But they will be just very, very slightly less true to life. And that always kind of bugged me just a little bit. So here we are using the scale color, even though they're a bit of a bastard to work with. Okay, so Kings of War. Kings of War versus Conquest. So Kings of War and Conquest are two games. Kings of War is older, but not by a lot. And each of them is trying to solve a fundamental problem, which is basically the dungeon quest problem that I described before, which is that the designers, and by extension the audience that they're courting, have incredibly fond memories of Warhammer Fantasy. And now the Kings of War Warhammer Fantasy memories are older than the Kings, because Kings of War coexisted, I think, with Warhammer Fantasy. It's been around for a while. But Warhammer Fantasy changed over time, blah, blah, blah. Kings of War is a game that attempts to distill the experience of Warhammer Fantasy being very true to kind of the core concepts, the core conceits, the core ethos. And in Kings of War, I believe, from my understanding of the game, that it's actually possible for one player to walk away from the table completely during their opponent's turn, provided there's that little degree of trust about dice rolls. There is nothing that one player needs to do during their opponent's turn. It's just, in that respect, it's the exact opposite of Infinity. And this is a distillation of Warhammer Fantasy, if you think about Warhammer Fantasy as a grand strategy. It's my turn and I do all of my stuff, and then it's your turn and you do all of your stuff. And Kings of War distills and distills and distills that down until the attack and damage and all of that system literally requires zero involvement from the player on this side of the table, other than removing their units when they get destroyed or routing. And there are some people for whom that's a really good piece of game design. That fits them well, it's what they want to do, it accomplishes what they want from a system. For me, that sounds like literally, if I was trying to intentionally design a game to be as unsuitable for me as possible, I would probably have that as a mechanic, because I need to be, I'm not a zoomer, but I'm pretty close. Well, actually, I'm an older millennial, but in terms of how I like to play games, I need to be mentally engaged. I do not want to be left alone with my own thoughts, or, perhaps more accurately, I don't want to be without any agency for a lengthy period of time. And because I don't want to be left without any agency, I need mental uptime in a game. Kings of War is therefore the worst possible game for me. Conquest approaches the same problem, which is, hey, we frickin' loved Warhammer Fantasy. Remember that when we were kids? That was the best. Can we have some more of that, please? But it approaches it from completely the other end, which is, we remember how it felt to play Warhammer Fantasy. Can we take a game designed in 2020 with the design sensibilities of design sensibilities of something modern, but use it to evoke the feeling of Warhammer Fantasy as we remember it? Wuju Style says, Kings of War changed stuff like rolling morale saves and rolling break, just to be able to have, completely asynchronous gameplay. Yeah. So they said it was so you could have a nice clean chess clock. Oh my, chess clocks. Chess clocks are the best system apart from everything else. No, sorry, the worst system apart from everything else that we've tried. I have played many games on chess clock. That's a weird statement. Like, it makes sense. I'm not disputing. I 100% can believe that someone said that. It's just weird to me, because the advantage of asynchronous play is that it allows for mental downtime. It allows one of the players to think about what's going to happen next turn, to chill out, to go and get a beer, to have a drink, to piss off to the loo, to actually disconnect from the game for a period before reconnecting. And there are situations that's a really good addition to a game in. Those situations are primarily social, right? Like, I am sitting down, I can think of a couple of people that I know for whom that is actually perfect as a mechanic, because their perfect game is one played on a Sunday afternoon with a beverage in hand, with, afternoon sun coming in through the windows, having it taking 3 hours to play the game, having a chat, shooting the shit, and the game is an excuse to do that. And that is a kind of experience that Kings of War is perfect for. The idea of a chess clock in Kings of War for tournament play is completely contrary to what I would consider to be the best use case, at least personally what I would consider to be the best use case of true asynchronous play that Kings of War has. And yet, yeah, okay, I mean, well, I can believe it. But Conquest approaches it from the other direction. Conquest approaches... oh, by the way, what I'm doing here, this is a technique that I've learned over time. I want to paint stocking, pantyhose. This also works for if you're trying to paint stubble. What that means is that I'm trying to paint a black fabric over skin tones. You do that by mixing black with skin tones. This seems like something that, like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But I genuinely, if someone hadn't like taught me that a decade ago, I would not have ever figured that out. And particularly doing, if you use that as a technique, if you're trying to paint like shaved, like a shaved head, for example, a lot of Infinity models will have like like gruff dudes with shaved heads. Just take the skin tone that you've painted the head in and mix some black into it, and you get some grey. And like it gives you exactly the tone that is appropriate for for a shaved scalp. Um, So, a couple of comments to catch up on. Araguma says, interesting insight, makes sense. Why I appreciate Infinity again, I've annoyed by Kings of War. Yeah, so I would, if you want to get into a rank and flank, if you want to play something that is really novel and different compared to Infinity, but keeps you mentally engaged, because all of those mechanics in Conquest, it's alternating activations, it's I go, you go, all of those different things are built with I want to stay mentally engaged in the game. I don't want to have time alone with my thoughts. I want to be playing the game for the entire 2 hours that I sit down with it. Infinity does that incredibly well with the active and reactive turn system, and Conquest does it with alternating activation. Song of Ice and Fire 2, actually. Song of Ice and Fire is a very good game in terms of that particular metric of being always able to be playing. You're never not playing Song, because you're at most a couple of minutes away from it being your turn. Or not even that, like you're almost a minute away, 2 minutes away from it being your turn. Ralph says, have you had a look at Hobgoblin, another recent attempt to recreate the rank and flank? No, I have not. Where would I find out more about Hobgoblin? Because that sounds really interesting. I cannot afford to invest in any more rank and flanks at this stage. I like Conquest a lot, but one of the things about it is that it is it's higher scale. It's like a larger scale. It's 38 millimeter or something. I don't know the specifics. But what that means is it's big. It's physically large. It looks quite nice. If I was to get an Infinity miniature and put it next to her, it would come up to about her shoulder, which makes painting in some respects kind of nice and easy. It looks really good. The monsters in Conquest look incredible on the table, like just absolute goers. Some of the dragons and the giants and stuff are just 10 out of 10. But it means that the physical space it takes up in my display shelf is not leaving much space. I have just enough space for my Song of Ice and Fire. And Infinity, very happily in that respect. Infinity is a jealous mistress in terms of the amount of space she takes up in your head, but she does not take up a lot of shelf space. So I've got my Infinity on 2 shelves in a glass display cabinet. My Conquest is currently occupying 6 shelves. And frankly, I could use more space. So, Electi Games, Mike Hutchinson, same designer as Gaslands. Ah, that's interesting. So Gaslands I have played. Gaslands, I was talking before about games that are designed to be the thing that they are. Bump the camera, sorry about that. Blades in the Dark being a role-playing game example. For anyone who's not played Gaslands, Gaslands is not a tournament game. Gaslands is a sit down with your mates and play an evening of Gaslands. Do not take it seriously, blah, blah, blah. But Gaslands is one of the best games with respect to evocative mechanics that I have played in recent memory. Miniature agnostic and quick playing. Donograph and I also haven't heard of Blood Fiends by Titanforge. Fantasy Skirmish, Orphan Activation, Focus on Objective Play, Frogs with Mushrooms. I've got a friend that's trying to get me, or is trying to showcase to me, Moon something. I'd have to go and look it up. It's going about fairies and mining moonstone. I think it's called Moonstone. So Gaslands, for anyone who hasn't played it, is just fantastic. Yeah, Moonstone. So how do I talk about Gas? How do I explain Gas? Because Gaslands is just a wonderful piece of evocative. So the best way to describe it is evocative design, where evocative design is when a mechanic evokes the thing. And what this produces is a sensation that playing the game is doing the thing. And it is not easy to design that in a way that also is good gameplay. It's really hard, and it comes up only occasionally. Infinity is not an example of evocative design, but the outcomes that you get from face-to-face rolls feel like gunfights, so it's very close. And one of the things I like about Infinity. But Gaslands is just start to finish evocative design wrapped around one of the most excellent core premises for a very one like it's one concept. It's Gaslands is Mad Max races, and the whole point of it is you sit down with your kids. No, I will optimize Gaslands. You can't stop me. So I got in. I've never gotten into Gaslands, but I have played it with a friend. Um, Gaslands is go down to wherever locally sells little toy cars and take those toy cars and bring them home and kit bash them into Mad Max races and then play Gaslands. It is technically that makes it miniature agnostic, but the concept is it's such a pure expression of fun from a modeling perspective. You don't need to do any of that. You can just play with the toy cars, you can do whatever, you could bust out all sorts of different things. But the game says to you, hey, listen, you were 10 years old once. This was an awesome idea back then. Go and just spend $20. Go down to the store, buy a bunch of these little toy cars, die-cast toy cars, come home, kit bash them with your kids, and then play Gaslands. And then the play of Gaslands is just an absolutely wild, madcap racing experience. Trying to work your way around obstacles, avoid crashing, avoid burning out, avoid blowing up. You run with, generally speaking, I believe in Gaslands, you play with multiple cars because, like, the more fragile ones are going to go up like a Pinto, and it's just fantastic. It is no good. Like, it's not a system that you could ever use for anything other than playing Gaslands. But the core mechanics are things like you have to gear shift your cars, and the way that happens feels like you're doing it. Um, the decisions that you have to make feel like you're making them in the moment as you're coming into a straight and accelerating, and then knowing that you'll have to brake and seeing how far you can leave it, and then something going wrong. Wonderful game. The idea of like a Gaslands tournament sounds like the worst possible thing imaginable, but for a hey everyone, we've got Sunday spare, it's a beautiful afternoon, come round and play some Gaslands. I have done that, and it is a borderline formative memory in terms of actually a very good and old friend of mine called Jason, who is not currently in my town. He is overseas, but he will be back probably in December, and I am really looking forward to that. I saw him on a visit earlier this year, but he is not a competition wargamer. He did spend quite a bit of time organizing War Machine back in the day. I'm a War Machine player, can you tell? But he's an incredible human being, a wonderful role player, but more importantly, a delight to be around, and I'm going to be really glad when he and his family are back in town. Because we will catch up, we will play role-playing games, we will play war games badly, we will play Gaslands. We'll probably play some Trench Crusade, actually. Trench Crusade is one of those games that I should love, but I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. Mechanically, it promises to be... I mean, it's Mordheim. Like, it's just Mordheim. It's by the designer of Mordheim. The mechanics are Mordheim. More modern, like he's obviously learned. Is the Warm Horde system still alive? Ex-War Machine players. Okay, so let's talk about War Machine for a moment, then I'll talk about Trench Crusade. So, is War Machine still alive? Yes. I don't play it, though. Not because it's bad. I think War Machine today is dated. I think it's showing its age a little bit. But that is not the same as bad, and there are people who really love it and still play it. It's a little battered and bruised as far as systems and communities go, because the whole thing with War Machine, in terms of tabletop role-playing games, what are your favorites? Blades in the Dark. I am not actually as experienced as I would like to be in terms of other systems. There are a few that interest me, but Blades is my favorite. It is only good for playing Blades, but yeah, I love that role-playing game. Um, I would not use it to play a, you know, 1950s noir social. Actually, you probably could now that I think about it. But anyway, War Machine. Um, War Machine. Yeah, War Machine still exists. We've got a local community in Canberra. I don't play it anymore, but I don't play it. It's not that I don't play it because it's bad. I don't play it because I played it for 10 years. I played it for 10 years. That's long enough to play a game. Uh, I've been playing Infinity for 6 or 7 years at this point. But like 10 years is a really long time to do something, and I was basically finished with War Machine at that point. However, I would note that the community has seen some ups and downs, and that is because the company that makes War Machine or made War Machine kind of like that. War Machine's big challenge was that it came into existence in response to a market demand. Not to put too fine a point on it. I did not know there was a cyberpunk version of Blades in the Dark. I will go and have a look at that. Um, and the market demand that produced War Machine was Games Workshop fucking sucks. And this is early 2000s, right? Like this is 2001 or something, where Games Workshop is currently going back through another Games Workshop fucking sucks moment, where the prices in particular are getting like extremely late stage capitalism. But in the early 2000s, the very early 2000s, Games Workshop was like at its nadir of popularity, and stuff emerged to fill the void. But War Machine was probably the most successful thing. War Machine was, hey, do you want a game that is explicitly designed to be competitive and tight, like a tight rule system? That's something we take for granted these days, kind of, or have gotten used to not having. But the like back in the day, like when all there was Games Workshop and like crappy 2001 Games Workshop rules, the idea of a tight rule system where you could read the rule and it would tell you how the rule worked, and balance of game balance in war games. What? What do you mean one faction? What do you mean the faction that had the codex that was released this month isn't just wildly overpowered? All of that came into existence and was massive. Like it was such a big deal, War Machine and Hordes, because it was all of the things that people wanted and wrapped up in a pretty cool system and a pretty cool aesthetic. It was different. It was unique. There was a lot going on. The thing is that kind of demand, many other systems have come in to fill that particular gap over time. Most games these days, even Games Workshop, which still cops flack now and again, is not. Games Workshop went through a renaissance in the like 2010 to 2020 kind of period, probably even earlier than that, like 2008, I think, was when it started. And Games Workshop kind of recovered its player trust. And War Machine and Hordes kept on after that. But that primary reason for uh, War Machine existing was that Games Workshop sucked. And so War Machine sort of like just faded away a little bit. Not because it was bad, but because its reason for existing wasn't as pressing anymore. And there were so many other games coming in to fill the void. There were lots of war games out there. Like these days, if you want to be a war gamer, you have a colossal selection of choices. You have so many different things that you can play. And War Machine is in 2025 still a system that was fundamentally designed in 2001 or thereabouts. And so it's showing its age in the same way that like Warhammer Fantasy shows its age these days. But there are still people who really like it and who have really fond memories of it and who just like it as a system, who it works for them. And so yeah, War Machine and Hordes is absolutely still about. I'm not playing it personally, but 100% still exists. The company went through some kind of rough times trying to figure out what their like role in the marketplace was. They eventually got acquired. Now I'm pretty sure this is the case. So Steamforged Games bought Privateer Press, and Steamforged Games, I believe, was actually originally created by. It was founded by a bunch of competitive War Machine players. So that's just very full circle. But they are mostly doing 3D printing stuff these days. Your mileage may vary on how much you like that. But yep, no, they're still around. They still exist. Now, the legacy of War Machine and Hordes, I think, is War Machine and Hordes players. And this is something that Ivory mentioned a bit further up in chat, which is like you only hear about War Machine through ex War Machine players. My observation of ex War Machine players is that if you played competitive War Machine during the game's heyday, it broke all of your mental middle gears because it was from 2001 to 2015 the competition war game. Like you got into War Machine and you kept playing War Machine because you wanted to compete. And there was a certain generation of people, right, who maybe they played 40k until they were 13 and then lapsed out a little bit and then wanted to play some more and wanted to play something competitive. And you have that like 21-year-old that wants to be the very best, the best there ever was. And War Machine was the right place at the right time for those people. I was one of those people. War Machine, because of that like ultra high level of competition, taught you ruthlessly how to be ultra competitive. And the time management mechanics in particular are one of the game's biggest legacies. Because even someone who was not necessarily like a best there ever was War Machine player will have learned how to play a game on clock because War Machine used chess clocks. And if you ever run into a conversation with someone where they are vehemently against chess clocks, there is a very good chance that they played War Machine back in the day and are remembering it because it was high stress. It was fascinating in retrospect. Like I wouldn't really want to go back to it, but that's because I am older now, and I look for different things in games. But there is nothing for teaching you how to make a decision quickly, like spending 10 years playing a game that aggressively requires time management. Um, and I have had many a game of War Machine and Hordes that has come down to what we can only refer to as clock slapping. Say that 10 times fast, where the because the game mode or eventually became, I mean, it's just steamroller, it's just the competitive system, but it became known as, the system is called death clock, and it's if you run out of time you lose. That's it, that's the long and the short of it. And because there are always some actions that will take place on your time, you needed to manage your time in War Machine and Hordes. You could not ever just let the clock run out. You always needed time to play on, which means that you had to manage your time carefully, aggressively, efficiently. You have to learn how to do it. Like you have to really learn how to manage your time in War Machine, because if you didn't, you would lose, and you would lose because the clock went beep 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 beep, and that's it. The game was over, and you had lost. And there is nothing for teaching you how to make decisions quickly like that experience. And so many War Machine players will have that, but what it does is it sort of it breaks out your middle gears in terms of your like your mental model for playing a game and how you approach something. You just slip into that competitive brain mode, and it means that War Machine players are basically an invasive species, because the level of competition in War Machine was so fierce and so honed if you played during that period, that when you go into other game systems, you have like this muscle memory for how play works. And I can turn it off when I'm running a demo, or when I'm like if I'm trying to curate an experience for someone and I'm trying to make sure that they have like it's their second or third game, or it's a demo, or even just they want to test something or try something. I can turn on a different part of my brain, which is the dungeon master part of the chronic dungeon master part of my brain, the forever dungeon master, which I'm not at the moment. Actually, I'm playing Dungeons, well, Pathfinder, with some friends, and for the last couple of years, I have very happily not been the forever DM, but I was before that. But if I engage my forever DM muscle memory, I can turn off the War Machine competition and just play a game where I am trying to produce an experience for my opponent that is what they're looking for. Uh, but if I'm playing competition and that reflex gets triggered, it's just a strong competitive reflex. And so basically Any ex War Machine player that played for any length of time will probably have that because it just got drummed into you. And it was a very interesting time. It was a very interesting experience. It teaches you how to play basically any war game quickly because you have to. You just have to make decisions. Like if you play War Machine competitively, even semi-competitively, you play War Machine with a clock involved. You just have to. You have to make decisions quickly. You have to make decisions. You have to make a decision, make a decision, make a decision. Because if you do not make a decision, time will pass, you will run out of time, and you will lose the game. That's the long and the short of it. And although I'm not sure I would recommend necessarily clock training for Infinity players, necessarily, if you are genuinely looking to learn how to play any game more quickly, actually egg timers and the very first the very first War Machine steamroller events that ran on time, they used egg timers rather than chess clocks, and chess clocks came later. But if you ever run into someone who expresses deep concern about the idea of using chess clocks in whatever game system, there's actually a very good chance that they played War Machine during the ultra competitive period and have had a reflex reaction to that, and treat those people with care and respect because they probably are in the middle of a Vietnam flashback when they're talking about their experience with chess clocks. I do not mind, personally, I don't mind playing on chess clocks at all, but it's the kind of thing where I would only introduce it to a game if I thought it was absolutely necessary, if it was critical to the experience in some capacity, or and I've used chess clocks in Infinity events as an optional thing, where if both players want to use them and think they would benefit from it, I have used chess clocks, but not death clock. Just if you run out of time, end your turn, and don't take any more turns. Just take your arrows. That works pretty well in Infinity. But I've never mandated chess clocks in any event that I've run, and I really don't think I would. And I don't think I would mandate them in Conquest either, because there are people who they are not suitable for. German Infinity tournaments almost always use chess clocks. I don't mind because I tend to overthink. Yeah. So the big benefit of timing mechanisms is it's that they keep you to time. What's your bingo card for Infinity Corvus Belli for Adepticon? Oh, Donograph says that they haven't used that. So the thing about chess clocks, before we get on to Adepticon, which I actually have no idea about, is they boil down to they're a mechanism for keeping time. That's the long and the short of it. And as a tournament organizer, particularly if I'm running an event at the local game store on a Sunday, where the closing time is less forgiving than on a Saturday, I really want people to finish their games in 2 hours. Now, Infinity has a few tools for that, including the tournament organizer walks around and says, "Hey, what turn are you guys up to? Okay, just play the 2 rounds then." Active, like, helicopter tournament organizing does work, but it only works for small scale events. And so you can use chess clocks, and that's how I've used them in events in the past. If you think you'll need this, pull out the chess clock, play with the chess clock. And it's not a loss condition. If you run out of time, just that's it. That's the end of your turn, and then you can only take arrows from there. So, for example, if you get all the way through to your 3rd turn and you run out of time partway through your 3rd turn, no problem. End your turn there, finish whatever order you're up to, and then you get to take your arrows in your opponent's next turn. Now, that's the advantage of that, is that as a tournament organizer, I know that my players will play more or less to time with a little bit less helicopter TOing, which is something that I mentioned that is fine if you're running a small event and you can afford to helicopter TO and you're not playing, well and good. However, you can't do that for a big event. So you just do dice down or something, or you use clocks. The real advantage of timekeeping mechanisms in play outside of that is the training. Yeah, so Wu just notes that he hates that, being told that there won't be a turn 3. Yeah, right? So it's all of it is the worst system except for everything else that we've tried. The best possible is that everyone knows how to play to time. That's the best possible. I would personally note that there won't be a round 3 thing. Once you get past a certain skill level in Infinity, any opponent that can't play 3 rounds in the time that you've got to play a game, you are probably going to beat by round 2 anyway. So I'm not too fussed about it once you get beyond sort of like a certain skill level, because that's usually something associated with sort of intermediate players or players that get into their own heads very badly. But it's still absolutely non-ideal. So chess clocks are, if you want to learn how to play to time, a chess clock is a very useful way of doing that. However, I would actually go as far as to say that a better way is actually just a kitchen timer. Because the great advantage of a kitchen timer is that it's asynchronous, and you only have to time yourself. All you need to do is get a chess clock and try and figure out approximately how much get a kitchen timer and figure out how much time you think you should have for each stage of the game, remembering that deployment is a stage of the game in Infinity. And then set yourself a timer. And so, yeah, someone who used to, so Wuju Style says he used to get in his own head super badly and take 45 minutes to deploy in Infinity. Yeah, that is way too long. And I've known players who have that, probably not actually that bad, because that's impressive, actually. That is some impressive levels of second guessing yourself. I get it, 100%. But yeah, get a chess clock, kitchen timer, and give yourself something like 15 minutes for deployment, 15 minutes for your first turn, 10 minutes for your second turn, 10 minutes for your third turn. And that gives you a total of 50 minutes. You should take no longer than an hour to play a game of Infinity. Give yourself a 5-minute extension, you can use it any time. So you've got 15 minutes for deployment, 15 minutes first turn, 10 minutes second turn, 10 minutes third turn, and a single 5-minute extension. And you can just impose that limit on yourself. Yeah, Araguma says just use a phone. Yeah, 100%. You can get timing apps on any phone and just use a clock, use a timer, and just check and see. Set yourself a timer, see how long you take. And if you do that for a few games, the experience of running out of time or seeing that time tick down, it will be stressful. That is not an experience that just it does not evoke any feeling. But it will teach you. That's how long it should take you most of the time. Infinity, you should generally be looking at about 15 minutes to deploy, maybe slightly longer if you're going second, for example. If you're going second and trying to defend against a particular alpha strike, okay, a little longer than 15. First turn should usually take about a quarter of an hour. Subsequent turn should usually take 10 or 12 minutes. Give yourself that amount of time, and it will teach you, and you can see the time counting down. It will actually teach you how to play in that time. It actually can be really interesting as an experience learning that and seeing the time pass before your eyes and coming to that realization of how long you are taking to do certain things. Like, it is a fascinating experience to go through that learning process, but it also produces a way better, like, once you have learned it, once you have gotten that down, developed that muscle memory, developed that ability to recognize when you are getting in your own head and getting in a loop, and just short circuit it and be like, make a decision. Make a decision, because at this stage I'm running out of time, and any decision is better than no decision. You will notice that happen like game by game, and it's super interesting as and when it like going through that learning experience. Oh, fun fact. Army Painter speed paints. I really like these. This is the second batch. The first batch had a real problem with reactivation. I never use any of those, but a lot of the washes that I use for this scheme, these are really nice colors. Like this Carmine Dragon, if you see, it's not coming through super well it's washed out a little bit in this, but these flowers are like this really rich carmine color. Super nice. These washes are really good. You can let them down with Vallejo Glaze Medium, and the behavior changes slightly. And the black, for example, makes a really good armor wash. And although an armor wash is not something that you necessarily need for Infinity, after this I have to paint like 50 men-at-arms. And I need shortcuts to do that. And an armor wash is one of the best shortcuts you can have. Paint a medal, paint an armor wash over it. Yeah, Aragama says just time myself using a phone. Yeah, like that's a great plan. All right. Yeah, Army Painter speed paints are good. I use for regular acrylics, I tend to like Vallejo. But when you find a range that is good and that range works for you, yeah, I have had really good experiences with the consistency, the coverage, but most importantly, the colors. Like literally just the coloration, the pigmentation, the density, whatever the different effects, however they've mixed up the Army Painter speed paints, just really nice colors. So Rob, when is the pitches are broken can rant? I don't think pitches are broken. I do think they should be more limited. I'm not sure they are necessarily achieving the current design goal. I'd be really interested, actually. I know one or two people. Actually, I know one person that was in the playtesting, not design, playtesting, for N5, and who burned out a little bit after that because, spoiler alert, playtesting sucks. The good playtesting is one of the most enjoyments happy. It's work. It's like every now and again you will run into people who'll be like, game design or play testing. I love play. Like no, it's play testing. It is work. But I know that the playtesting community that Corvus Belli cultivated gave a lot of feedback, but ultimately Corvus Belli made a lot of their own decisions. Pitcher range bands are a pretty weird one, but that's just a weird. I don't think they're bad. I think the 24 inches zero distance really just means that it's link or good luck or bust. But it's weird. Like I feel like you look at the change and you assume, they must have been attempting to tone down how powerful pitches were as a network projection tool in N4. And it's like, well, you just gave them a better zero range band, so now the long bombs that are really annoying for people are easier. I don't know. Pitches are something I wouldn't be surprised to see change, but I also wouldn't be surprised to not see change. They're weird. They're fine. We'll adapt to them. Like the bulk of the community response to them has been wargamers hate only two things: change and the way things are. But I'm not 100% that pitches are doing what the developers necessarily thought they would, but I don't know what the developers thought they would. Yeah, I'm annoyed that Vanilla Nomads don't get any special light pitches, and only Pywell Sync gets a burst too. Yeah, Vanilla Nomads are. I had a. Oh, hang on, this will be a canned rant. Let me just address something else first. Adepticon. Nothing is on my bingo card for Adepticon. I'm looking forward to whatever it is that they announce. The thing I guess I'm wondering about is, will we see anything for Onyx Contact Force? How quickly are they going to move with releases? And I actually don't know what the answer to that is. Like I could put my commercial hat on and think about how I would do it in Corvus Belli's shoes, and I think the answer to that is kind of aggressively, actually. My assumption is that they will want to move relatively quickly on new releases for N5 because N5 has had a surge of popularity. N5 has got people out of the woodwork, people are keen, people are spending money and buying. So my assumption is that what we will see from Corvus Belli is capitalization on that. So if I had to guess, I would say we might see something about Onyx Contact Force at Adepticon. That's just a guess, and it's a guess based only on the fact that we know that Onyx Contact Force is the next faction that's going to be reworked, and the ISS rework is complete, and it's coming out at Adepticon. The reason why you might not spoil stuff about Onyx Contact Force at Adepticon is you don't want to cut your own grass. You don't want to. You want people. You want a little bit of time in which people are spending their money on your ISS stuff. Because if you immediately announce your next product, people who were on the fence about what to spend their money on might wait, and you don't want them to do that. So ISS probably will be the focus. plus some what's coming up stuff. Anything we see about Onyx, we might see Onyx Contact Force mentioned, but I would be very surprised to see anything more than, "Ooh, it's coming, start getting excited, start building that hype." Probably nothing particularly concrete. I don't otherwise, I'm not sure what they're like, what are they working on? I don't know what. Probably some Warcrow stuff, but I am not going to talk much about Warcrow because I was taught not to say anything if you couldn't say something nice. And Warcrow does not quite. Warcrow is a very, very good game that is not for me, probably. One day I will get over my hatred of proprietary dice. But I've had a demo for Warcrow, and I could not get over my hatred of proprietary dice. I'll give it another crack in 6 months, maybe. I also think Warcrow is a little bit of a case of my impression of the design is that Corvus Belli has a habit of treating game design as if it was itself a game. You see that in some of how they do profile design, for example. You see it in, like, it's very obvious from time to time that a profile comes out for War Machine that is the product of one of the game designers going, oh shit, I can game this formula and produce this really cool thing. Looking at you, the N4 Libertos. And that's fine. That's totally okay because ultimately the formula does restrain them a little bit, and it's fine to have good things. Like I've never been a person that is particularly concerned by the ostensible idea that. So occasionally you'd see in N4 complaints about, and I'm just going to adjust the auto exposure a little bit, see if that fixes that. You'd occasionally see complaints in N4 in particular about how, like, oh, the Libertos has been min-maxed. The X profile, Y profile has been min-maxed, and that is bad for some reason. Which has always been kind of a ridiculous complaint to me whenever I saw it, because it's just like, oh, I mean, your complaint is about power level, and is that model breaking the game? No, because Infinity, by nature of its design, is hugely resistant to individual models breaking the game. It's not immune to it, but the nature of gameplay in Infinity produces a very imbalance resistant core design. It's one of the little miracles of Infinity as far as game design goes. But you do still occasionally see in Corvus Belli this sort of like design culture of the developers are obviously having fun with their own systems as they create the game. And I think that's fine to a certain extent because you should enjoy your work. You produce better quality work if you're having a good time. But my impression of some of Warcrow is that there's a bit more of that coming through than I would necessarily consider ideal. And in particular, I know that some of the Warcrow design team rather, I think some of them it's their first game. And the trap that a designer falls into for their first game is wanting to curate an experience. They want the game to be played in a certain way, emergent gameplay, which is actually one of the greatest possible things that you can have, right? Unpredictable but fun effects that emerge as a result of player exploration. Emergent gameplay that's the holy grail of design. If you can have that come out of your system, you've done it. But it's terrifying for a first-time designer. And because you want to present, you've been given a brief, right? You've got a goal in mind. And if the players aren't doing the thing, you're like, oh, well, how do I fix this? How do I make the players do the thing that I am designing the game for them to do? And I don't think the Warcrow design team fell into the trap of we don't want the players to do anything except we wanted them to do. But there are bits and pieces of design in Warcrow that strike me as the game design team only wanted X thing to happen Y way. They're a very curated experience. probably the example that really struck to me. This is not a completely fair example because I'm cherry picking out of my overall experience. But I remember sitting down for a demo with a very good local lad who's super enthusiastic, and I'm really glad because it's a cool looking game, and I want people playing it, and I want the design team at Conquest to have time to work on it. And I remember he made an attack against my bucklermen, and he didn't have a way of stopping switches from occurring. And I sat down and I tried to figure out what the average result of my defense roll was. And if you look at a bucklerman's green dice, a green defense dice rolled by a bucklerman, the possible outcomes on that die roll are one shield, or 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 two shields, or one shield. And that's not a probability curve. That doesn't need to be a die roll at that point. That is pretending to have variance in your game and hoping that the players don't notice that is actually deterministic. Now, that's a very picked example because you also roll black dice as part of the bucklerman's defense roll, etc. But the curve of possible outcomes for a bucklerman defense roll where they don't have switches turned off it's incredibly tight. It's like almost always going to be X or Y, which means that the variance only really comes from whatever the attacking element is, which then means that it's more down to what your opponent is using. And I also felt that and it's been a while since I played it now, but the activation system where you get to activate very little of your army. Like, I think it's like four units in a turn. And, well, you might have 4 units, and there's a pseudo-order system, but it involves stressing yourself to do additional activations, which heavily constrains emergent gameplay because it's very unlikely that you will be able to activate 1 unit multiple times. It requires a lot of work to do that, and accruing penalties. There's all of this stuff in Warcrow that reads as, oh, anything could happen, but not too much. We want games to play out a certain way. And so you have a very constrained initial offering, and part of that's informed by the fact that there's only 2 factions. So yeah, I have a lot of like little nitpicky complaints about the design of Warcrow that more boil down to, it's not quite for me yet. Wuju Style notes that their issue is that none of the factions or armies seem remotely or interesting in any way. I like a little bit of what's going on. I like the design of the hegemony. Behold, what I would probably be doing if I was not playing Conquest aesthetically with hegemony. But and I actually like the Bretonnian with the serial numbers filed off faction. There's a lot of genericism, but then the scions are pretty interesting and different. But if none of it sparks joy for you, none of it sparks joy. Hey Rob, says Rob, Rob Tibke, has a fellow Rob who started with 40k before moving on to War Machine and then getting back into War Machine with Conquest and Infinity. Oh yeah, thank you. Oh, nice. Yep. That wasn't a question at all. That was just you saying something. Thank you, Rob. A pleasure to meet. I tip my hat to you, one Rob to another. Okay, well look, this is reaching the stage where I have a bunch of washes on it now, and I need to clean up a few things. But that's basically sound as far as base coating goes. Someone asked the question a while back. She is glossy as hell because the glaze medium is it's a mild drying retardant. How long does it take to go from unpainted miniature to painted, I think was the question. Depends. She will take a little longer. I can paint a Conquest if I've got the base done, and I don't have the base completely done, but this is what she's going to be going on. If I have, let's just have a look at how she fits on there now with that color. If I've got the basing done, I can just about paint a Conquest character miniature in an afternoon. My Eric Scher, who I would have to go and open up an army case to get. How's that looking? Yeah, and then there'll be red flowers all along there. I think that's pretty okay. I painted him in about an afternoon because it's pretty heavy on the speed painting. It's just base coats and glazes, but then you do an entire army of that, and it comes together nicely. But for regiments, it takes time because Conquest regiments consist of bare minimum 12 dudes or 3 horses. And you got to get into the batch painting, but the last miniatures I painted before this were, I'm really tired of batch painting, I need a break. So this stream was an excuse to do some painting again, and I think it served that purpose well. Oh yeah, Trench Crusade thoughts, and then opinions on the current state of Conquest balance. Aura of Death. So, moving backwards, Donograph, you'll be pleased to know that Aura of Death has been adjusted significantly. It still does what you remember, but it's been changed from a hits per stand to hits per regiment. So you might have, at the very top end, an entire regiment, no matter how big it is, might inflict 8 hits at the Aura of Death step, which is still a good rule, but it's not the... I was an Old Dominion player during that period, and it's like, well, my Praetorians are engaging you. I need you to take 24 hits. That doesn't exist anymore. Conquest balance overall, it's good. It's pretty good. If I went to an event tomorrow, I'd play my 100 Kingdoms because they're what I'm working on. But there is no faction you could tell me won an event and I would be surprised. 3 rounds or 5 rounds. There's no faction that you could say, oh, X faction won. Okay, if you told me Euroni, I'd be surprised because how did they get the models? They're only just coming out. But even when Euroni are fully released, my expectation would be, yeah, Euroni will win events. Now, I think probably actually of all factions, once we are a year into Euroni's release, I would be surprised to see them win 5-round events, but that's because the way they are designed is there'll be a very good faction for going 4 wins, 1 loss. They will not be a fantastic faction for going 5 wins because they don't like being out-activated. And there will be someone in those 5 rounds that you play against that's running white activations. 100 Kingdoms, I knew I wanted to play because I saw the render for the Archangel and was like, well, I have to have that. That model's incredible. Google 100 Kingdoms Archangel if you want to see a just ridiculous banger of a miniature. But they have hit what I would consider to be the gold standard, which is like just about 70 to 80% profile viability, like genuine competitive profile viability across the whole range. There are multiple different ways to play 100 Kingdoms. It's really like they spent some time on that because there's no one way that's the best either. Other factions are probably going to be brought down and up to that over time. So you'll see like Dwegom are next up for a rework, and right now the Tempered Creed playing the Sorcerer mini faction in Dwegom is as good as any of the best stuff in the game. Everything else in Dwegom is crap. If you try and play a Hold Reg Warlord, there's a meta list that actually uses that, but like, damn, it's a stretch. You're challenging yourself. So what I expect is that in their rework, Dwegom will come up to like the top end will be bought. Probably it'll stay where it is, but then the rest of the faction will come up. And what else is being reworked this time around? There's one of Sorcerer Kings. Sorcerer Kings are a little tricky. Sorcerer Kings is a design challenge for Parabellum, is its whole thing that I could rant about. Not in a negative way. That's a separate thing. So yeah, Conquest balance is pretty good right now. It is still a game that is challenging to win if you run into someone who's more experienced, mostly because so many decisions in Conquest, you will make a decision and then it will bear terrible fruit, like literally 15 or 20 minutes later, multiple turns later. And the biggest thing in terms of becoming good at Conquest is you'll have that game state that occurs where you're like, a terrible thing has just happened. Who is to blame for this? And the delta between being an okay Conquest player and a good Conquest player, that journey happens when you learn that the answer to that question is, it was me. It was me 15 minutes ago. I am responsible for the position I'm currently in. What could I have done differently in terms of setting up and deploying my armies to change this situation that I'm in right now? Because you will see a lot in Conquest, people who are learning all the time. The complaint will be, X mechanic did me in, or I lost the initiative roll again and I lost because of that. And it's like, okay, hold up. What decisions could you have made? Not just in this turn, but 2 turns ago when you were deploying your lights and your medium regiments. When that heavy cavalry regiment arrived on turn 3 and you put it over there, what would have happened if you put it somewhere else? That's how you get good at Conquest. But the balance of Conquest pretty well supports that. There are criticisms that I could make about the balance process, but they're more about being careful of the influence of hyper-competitive players versus the influence of casual players and balancing those rather than assuming that one is in primacy. What is the most OP faction in Conquest? After I have just finished saying that it is broadly very balanced. I actually don't know. I don't. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I'd have said that the single most powerful army was a Sorcerer King's army, but that like one player in the world was capable of playing that to its maximum level, and even they are not quite capable of playing it consistently at a competitive level. It was that challenging to play. What is the most overpowered? I personally fear very early game oriented Wadroon, only because, and certain Old Dominion lists, only because like real like Moroi lists that are willing to gamble it all on Moroi in what is the worst army in Conquest? Hey Stuart, it's been a while, my dude. What is the worst army in Conquest? Anyway, so I think that the best armies are those one. Not sorry, the most overpowered. Overpowered is a tricky thing, but the most likely Conquest army to produce an experience where it feels like they are overpowered, possibly inaccurately, are Old Dominion in the very late game, because Old Dominion are a late game oriented army, and if you faff around and think that the game is fine, and then it's turn 6 and you're facing a full power OD list, that can be like, oh, this faction is bullshit. But again, the cause of your problems is a decision that you made that you made 20 minutes ago. But there are a couple of armies that can play very, very early game oriented. Ironically, Old Dominion in certain configurations one of those. Nords to an extent, but really Wadroon. Wadroon have some very, very strong, very, very strong early game presence that if you just feed yourself into that meat grinder, can produce experiences where you're like, what the hell was I supposed to do? And the answer is don't feed yourself into a meat grinder. Conquest is a long game. But city states actually can build a list that is similar. And if you just endure through the early game of matches against the Thorakiti heavy city states or the slingers, and there's a configuration that a friend of mine, Ewan, runs in Wadroon that is like 4 or 5 Raptor Riders with a Thunder Chieftain. And playing against that for the first time is just like, this unit killed everything I brought to the table one at a time. Ra says, nothing to do with Conquest. Thank you for the Infinity comment. Ra, you're very welcome. We're doing Conquest talk because I have Conquest miniatures on the table. We did a bunch of talk about Corregidor earlier in the stream. So yeah, Wadroon can feel very overpowered, but only if you aren't able to get through those first few turns. The most mid army in Conquest is Ardent Creed Dwegom. They're not great, but they're not terrible. They're fine if you know how to use them. No! But I wouldn't take them to an event, but I would play them in a casual game. Now we bait him into doing a tier. I have considered doing Conquest tier lists just because someone asked, is there a Conquest 100 Kingdoms unit tier list? And it made me see red. But anyway. Trench Crusade. What are my thoughts on Trench Crusade? It might actually be slightly too grimdark for me. So when Trench Crusade was spoiled, I had a like, oh yes, because I have fond memories of Mordheim, like very fond memories of Mordheim, and the idea of running a Mordheim campaign, but like let's do a touch of grimdark and etc., was really cool. And then I went and looked at all the Trench Crusade factions, and because it's a grimdark, it's really grimdark. Like it's really, really grimdark. I had a really hard time finding a faction that I was willing to actually be like, yeah, that's the one for me, because they are all just like grim as hell. And it's gonna either be if I play it, and it might, it'll either be probably Iron Sultanate or New Antioch, because they're the only ones that are remotely non-hideous. Like at least the Iron Sultanate is Abominations of Science kind of thing. Yeah, Wuju Style says Trench Crusade seems like Space King in terms of how over at the top is. The difference I think is that, so I mean, Space King is a piss take. It's intentional. Trench Crusade plays it straight, and the fluff of Trench Crusade is so horrible. Like it's
if you read through the fluff, it's compelling, but it's compelling how like Sarah Douglas's novels are compelling, where it's just like horrible things happening to people over and over and over. And without getting into politics, let me just say that 2020 through 2025 has been a period where my tolerance for that has been a bit lower than it would usually be. So we'll see. I'm interested in it, particularly because it promises to be a Mordheim-esque game setting, but we'll see. Stuart says, keen for the Song of Ice and Fire update. I may play one game of Song of Ice and Fire when the update comes out, maybe. But I do not have. I consider Song of Ice and Fire in 2025 to predominantly be an interesting cautionary tale for a number of reasons about how game design works, which is very interesting. But yeah, I'll probably sit down and play one game with whatever they've broken or fixed with Free Folk and be like, cool, that was fun. I'll do that again in 6 months' time. Okay. Well, we've just clicked over 2 hours, and I have been talking just about the entire time. But I have succeeded in getting all of the base coats and washes down on a miniature. She is not remotely ready for tabletop play. She's got a fair bit of work to be done yet. There is, despite my best efforts, some highlighting. I'm going to need to get all the gold done and some detailing, and I won't be able to do that while I'm talking. Stuart says kind of how I feel. Yeah, it's okay. I had a really good time with Song of Ice and Fire, but it is a game based on a licensed IP. They have a shelf life. There's nothing you can do about that. Like Song of Ice and Fire as a setting, Star Wars, like any game that the community that is developing it has those restrictions and is beholden to the popularity of the IP, you're on a timer. It's how those kind of games work. Enjoy them while they exist. Have a good time with them, and then commit them to memory, basically. I'm not going to sell my Song of Ice and Fire stuff. I thought about it. I ultimately decided that it wouldn't have a resale market, and I'm also really happy with the army that I built, and it takes up 2 shelves on my display cabinet, and I like it. So I don't regret playing Song of Ice and Fire, but I think it's probably my only experience with a licensed IP game, and it was like, yeah, it was one of those experiences. Played it for several years, had a good time, and it's 2025 now. Anyway, Conquest sub-faction tier list. Maybe at some point. Anyway, so we're going to wrap this up now. I've accomplished my goal of getting some paint on a miniature, which I otherwise had not done for a month. So, I'm not answering that. Zephyr? Halo game. Yeah, Hooligan Tuesday, I do not understand the popularity of the Halo game. Not in the sense of, sorry, I understand the popularity. I am not personally able to replicate that experience even to my best attempts at empathy, because it is absolutely going to be, it's going to be a bunch of people in power armor. Like, I mean, I guess I guess some of the later games, I don't know. I don't understand the Halo game. It sort of was inevitable that it would have something happen, but maybe the mechanics hopefully will be good for people who enjoy it. Anyway, I've gotten some paint on a miniature. We've been doing this for 2 hours now, which means I have been talking for 2 hours straight. But this was a good time. This is an excuse for me to get some paint on a miniature when I otherwise might not, and it was not terribly difficult to set up. Although I did, just to peer behind the curtain briefly, I was in the middle of duct taping my webcam to a tripod when my partner said, "Isn't there an attachment screw on the bottom of the webcam?" And there was. So I unscrewed the webcam from its attachment piece and I screwed it into the tripod, and I had the duct tape forcibly taken away from me. And that will tell you something about the relationship dynamic between myself and my partner. Anyway, everyone, thank you very much for being here. This will go up as a VOD if you want to pay attention to some Corregidor, some Corregidor chat in talking about Infinity, talking about game design, some incomplete thoughts about determinism in wargaming, and then a bunch of talk about Conquest and Trench Crusade. By all means, the VOD will stay up. I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll do